Open the gate! We have a bomb, it's live, and it's gonna blow. You're standing in the guard tower of the Mecklenburg Correctional Center. It's a warm night in May 1984. Below, a white prison van idles at the main gate. Inside, the driver is screaming at you. His face is hidden behind the dark visor of a riot helmet. In the back of the van, white smoke hisses and billows from under a blanket. It looks like a chemical reaction gone wrong. It looks like death. You have a split second to choose. The rulebook says never open the gate without authorization, but the rulebook doesn't account for a bomb about to vaporize the front entrance. You look at the smoke. You look at the desperate men in the van. You think about your family, and you press the button. You sit back, heart pounding, thinking you just saved lives. You think you just helped a bomb disposal team avert a disaster. But what you don't know, what you won't know for another hour, is that there was no bomb. There was no bomb squad. The smoke was foam from a fire extinguisher. The detonator was a dial from an old floor waxer. And the men in the riot gear, they weren't guards. They were the Mecklenburg Six. They were the most dangerous men on death row, and you just held the door open for them. This is the story of the most audacious prison escape in American history. It's a story not about digging tunnels or cutting bars, but about hacking the human mind. It is the story of how 6 condemned killers with nothing but a pile of junk and a terrifying reputation bluffed their way out of a $42 million fortress. To understand the impossibility of this escape, we must look at the cage that they were trapped in, the Mecklenburg Correctional Center. It was not your grandfather's prison. It didn't have the damp, dark cells of Alcatraz. It was a state-of-the-art facility designed by psychologists and architects to be the ultimate escape-proof machine. The prison was built on a pod system. Instead of long hallways where riots could spread, inmates were kept in small, self-contained units. Each pod was a sterile white universe. In the center, raised like a throne, was the control booth. A fortress within a fortress, encased in bulletproof glass. From this bubble, a single guard controlled every door, lock, and light electronically. There were no keys to steal. There were no guards walking the floor to be taken hostage. To get out, you had to pass through a sally port, an airlock with 2 heavy steel doors designed so that one would never open until the other was closed. It was a cold, perfect machine designed to strip men of hope. But the architects made one fatal mistake. They focused so much on the steel and electronics that they forgot about the human element. They forgot that even the most perfect machine is operated by people, and people get bored. People get comfortable. The man who spotted this flaw was Linwood Briley. If you lived in Richmond, Virginia in the late 1970s, the name Briley was enough to make you lock your doors twice. Linwood Briley and his younger brother James were not average criminals. They were predators who treated violence like a sport. They didn't kill for money, they killed for the thrill. They drove through suburbs hunting victims at random. They killed an elderly woman hanging her laundry. They killed a teenage boy. But the crime that made the entire state of Virginia want to see them burn was the murder of the Wilkerson family. They broke into a home and brutally murdered a father, a 5-year-old boy, and the mother, who was 8 months pregnant. When finally caught, they were sentenced to multiple death penalties and sent to Mecklenburg to wait for the electric chair. Most men on death row break. They find religion or sink into depression. But Linwood Briley was different. Small, soft-spoken, and terrifyingly intelligent, he just sat in his cell in C Building. He didn't read the Bible, he read the guards. He watched them for months. He studied them like a biologist studies insects. He noticed strict protocols were slowly slipping. The guards were supposed to keep the control booth locked at all times, but sometimes, to save 5 seconds, a guard would leave it cracked open. They were supposed to never enter a pod alone, but sometimes they would walk in to fix a TV or chat. Linwood realized the guards didn't see him as a monster anymore. To them, he was just Linwood, the quiet guy in cell 2. He smiled, joked, and groomed them. He made them forget he was a predator waiting for a gap in the fence. He started to recruit a team, picking men who had absolutely nothing to lose. First was his brother James, the muscle. Then Lem Tuggle, a chaotic force with a twisted sense of humor. Then Earl Clanton, a giant with a hair-trigger temper. And finally, Willie Jones and Derek Peterson. 6 men, all murderers, all facing the electric chair. They knew if the escape failed and they were shot, it didn't matter. They were dead anyway. That knowledge gave them a terrifying kind of freedom. But a team wasn't enough. They needed a plan so audacious the guards wouldn't see it coming. They couldn't dig a tunnel through reinforced concrete. They couldn't cut bars because there were no windows. And so, they had to walk out the front door. To do that, they needed a prop. They decided to build a bomb. Obviously, they didn't have C4, but they had garbage, and Linwood knew that in a panic, garbage looks a lot like a weapon. They scavenged the prison, ripping apart a broken portable TV for wires and batteries. They found a gauge from an old floor waxer. They taped it all together on a board. To us, in a well-lit room, it would look like junk, but Linwood knew that in a dark hallway strapped to the chest of a serial killer, it would look like the end of the world. But a static bomb wasn't scary enough. They needed special effects. So they stole a fire extinguisher and figured out that spraying the chemical foam into a blanket covering the device made it hiss and bubble. It created a white, drifting fog that looked exactly like smoke from an unstable chemical reaction. And so, they had the team, they had the weapon, and now they needed the opportunity. May 31st, 1984. It was a Thursday night. The weekend was approaching, and the prison was quiet. At 8 p.m., the inmates were returning from recreation. This was the most dangerous moment. As the group walked back into the C-building pod, Earl Clanton made his move. Just inside the entrance, there was a small staff bathroom, a blind spot for security cameras. As the line shuffled past, Clanton slipped out and ducked into the bathroom. He left the door cracked a hair, standing in the dark, smelling bleach, holding his breath as the heavy boots of the guards passed by. The rest of the inmates went into the day room, the heavy steel door locked behind them. Now they were inside the pod, but the guard, Officer Cousins, was safely locked inside the bulletproof control booth. If Officer Cousins stayed in the booth, the plan was dead. James Briley walked up to the glass. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a bored inmate. He tapped on the glass, smiling, and asked Officer Cousins for help with something mundane. Perhaps a book left behind. It was a simple human request. Officer Cousins didn't think about protocols or the 12 murders these men had committed. He just thought about being helpful. He pressed the button to unlock his door and stepped out. That was the mistake that cost him everything. The moment Cousins stepped out, Earl Clanton burst from the bathroom, hitting the guard with the force of a freight train. Simultaneously, the other inmates rushed forward. They didn't scream or beat him, they swarmed him, covering his mouth and slamming him against the wall. Linwood stepped in close, holding a homemade knife to the guard's throat. "Make a sound," he whispered, "and you die right here." Cousins surrendered his keys. They dragged him into an empty cell, bound his hands with duct tape, and left him there. Now the inmates controlled the booth. They had the brain of the prison, but they needed to clear the entire path. What followed was a ruthless, methodical takeover. Linwood Briley picked up the internal phone in the control booth and dialed the guard down the hall. He kept his voice calm. "Hey, can you come down here for a second? We have a spill I need help with." The guard on the other end didn't suspect a thing. He walked down the hall, badged into the pod, and as the door hissed shut, he was grabbed. 5 pairs of hands, a knife to the ribs, stripped of his uniform, tied up, and thrown into a cell. They did this again and again. It was a domino effect. One by one, the Mecklenburg Six captured 12 guards, taking over the entire death row building without triggering a single alarm. Imagine the scene. 6 murderers running the highest security unit in the state, while a dozen guards sat bound in cells. It was a complete inversion of power. But they couldn't just walk out in prison blues. They needed a disguise. They raided the guards' lockers and found riot gear. It was the perfect cover. A mask. The helmets had dark, smoked visors that covered the face completely. They put on the gear. Linwood, a small man, looked comical in the oversized uniform, but with the visor down, he was just another officer. They went to the bomb. They sprayed it with the fire extinguisher. The foam bubbled and hissed, looking radioactive. They loaded it onto a stretcher. Then Linwood made the call that would become legendary. He called the Master Control Center, deepening his voice to mimic a lieutenant. He sounded urgent and panicked. Control, we have a major malfunction in C building. A fire extinguisher has ruptured. We have found a suspicious device. The fumes are toxic. We need to evacuate this device immediately. Send a van to the back gate. The officer in Master Control hesitated. Evacuating a bomb wasn't in the manual, but the panic was real. Copy that, Control said. Van is on the way. The 6 men picked up the stretcher and walked out of the death row unit into the main administrative corridors. They walked under bright fluorescent lights, passing administrative staff. A secretary working late looked up and saw 6 men in full riot gear carrying a smoking stretcher. She didn't ask for a badge. She pressed herself against the wall, terrified, letting the heroes pass her. She thought they were saving the prison. They reached the loading dock. The van was waiting. They threw the bomb in the back, Linwood jumped into the driver's seat, and the others piled in. And now, we're back at the main gate, the final barrier. The van pulled into the space between the fences. The guard in the glass tower looked down. Linwood leaned out, visor down, pointing back at the smoking van. We have to get this out of here, now. The psychology of this moment is fascinating. The guard in the tower had the power to stop them. All he had to do was ask for a badge number. But Linwood had created a tunnel of fear where the only way out was to open the gate. The guard's brain screamed danger, explosion. Logic shut down. Several instincts took over. He pressed the button, and the gate opened. The van drove out past the perimeter fence and turned onto the public road. The wind rushed through the windows, and they were free. They drove a few miles into the woods and ditched the van, ripping off the riot gear. And here, the genius of the escape met the stupidity of reality. These men had spent months planning how to get out, but 0 time planning what to do once they were free. They had no money, no car, and no friends waiting. They split up. It was a fatal mistake. The state of Virginia erupted into panic. When the prison realized the Brileys were gone, the news hit the public like a shockwave. Gun sales skyrocketed overnight. People who never locked their doors were nailing them shut, and the governor declared a state of emergency. There was a chilling detail that came out later. When police searched the abandoned van, they found a map. It wasn't a map of Mexico or Canada. It was a local map with circles marking the homes of the judges who had sentenced them and the witnesses who testified against them. The Brileys hadn't just escaped to run, they had escaped to hunt. While the state was paralyzed with fear, the fugitives were stumbling around in the woods, defeated by their own lack of planning. Earl Clanton and Derek Peterson fell first. They didn't make it to a safe house. They walked into the small town of Warrenton, North Carolina, starving. They found a coin-operated laundromat and bought wine and cheese from a convenience store. Imagine the scene. The 2 most wanted men in America who just humiliated the Department of Corrections, sitting in a bright fluorescent laundromat, eating cheese and drinking cheap wine, watching washing machines spin. A police officer drove by, saw 2 strangers, and walked in. They surrendered without a fight, trading their freedom for a snack. Lem Tuggle and Willie Jones stole a pickup truck. Tuggle, the wild card, drove all the way to Vermont, miles from the Canadian border. He was almost safe, but he couldn't help himself. He robbed a souvenir shop for $80 and some candy. The clerk called the police. Tuggle was caught at a roadblock, escaping death row, only to be caught for petty theft. But the Brileys, the monsters, they were ghosts. The FBI launched one of the biggest manhunts in history, tracking leads in New York, Canada, and the Caribbean. They assumed the brothers were long gone. But the Brileys hadn't fled the country. They had gone to Philadelphia. They went to an uncle's house, shaved their heads, grew beards, and got fake names. Incredibly, they got jobs. Linwood Briley, the mastermind killer, became a mechanic at a local garage, fixing brakes, changing oil, chatting with customers about the weather. James Briley did odd jobs in the neighborhood. For 19 days, they lived the American dream. They were free men. They were so confident that they held a barbecue in the backyard. I mean, picture it. The sun is shining, the grill is smoking, Linwood Briley is flipping burgers, the neighbors are waving from across the fence. Nobody knew that the man with the spatula was a death row fugitive. Neighbors later told reporters the brothers were nice, quiet guys, but they made one mistake. They got homesick. One brother called a friend in New York, who patched them through to their father in Richmond. The FBI was listening. They traced the call to the garage in North Philadelphia. On June 19th, the hammer dropped. The FBI didn't take chances. They sent the hostage rescue team, surrounding the garage with snipers, armored vehicles, and dozens of agents. They expected a final stand. The agents just stormed the backyard, like, FBI, get down. They found the brothers by the grill. Linwood looked up, seeing laser sights on his chest and a wall of black uniforms. He didn't reach for a gun, he just sighed, because the bluff was over. "I'm Linwood," he said softly. They were handcuffed and flown back to Virginia. The security was so tight it looked like a presidential motorcade. When they walked back into Mecklenburg, the silence was heavy. The guards they had tricked were waiting, and the prison was locked down. The trust was gone forever. All 6 men were eventually executed. Linwood Briley was the first to go, strapped into the electric chair just months after his escape. As he sat there, in the very chair he had run from, he had no more tricks, no more fake bombs, and no more riot gear. The story of the Mecklenburg Six proves that you can build the most high-tech walls in the world, but if the person watching them blinks, they're useless. They stole 19 days of life. For 19 days, they weren't numbers in a file, they were men who felt the sun, tasted the wine, and smelled the barbecue smoke. They knew they were going to die, but they decided to play one last hand against the house. And for a brief moment, with a fake bomb and a cloud of fire extinguisher foam, they won. If you enjoyed this Prison Break case, check out the channel. There you'll find many great stories just like this one. If you like what you see, please subscribe. I'd be very grateful, and I'll catch you next time.